Hi students, this is the video you're going to watch on Friday, the day that we don't have class in the classroom. So I want to pick up where we left off and continue working through the content from chapter 7 and 8. So this is the next slide in the slideshow that is also shared on our Learn site, so you guys can follow along on your own, and you can go back and read through this content at your own pace. But I just wanted to pick up on some of the main themes in this slideshow so that you understand how the information that you're learning about creating documentation and particularly procedures connects to what you're going to be doing in your first assignment, your instructions video. So anything that you're saying or anything that you're writing for your instructions when you're writing your script, you're going to want to compose it and speak in plain style, which means you're not going to be using jargon or you're not going to be using discipline-specific terminologies. Similarly, I want you to think about when subject qualifier words are appropriate. So those are words that emphasize something like very or exceedingly or extremely. So it adds emphasis to a word. So if you're saying this is an extremely important process, you're putting emphasis, you're qualifying the word process. So when you're composing your script for your instructions, take a look at how you're using those and if they're necessary. The third item here on the screen concerns page layout. So certainly if you're designing print instructions or print procedures, you'd be really concerned with page layout. You'd want to decide whether you're going to work in one column or multiple columns and how you were going to organize your page in terms of where the images would be. However, your first assignment is a video instruction set, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't concern yourself with page layout also. You're going to think about this in terms of screen layout. Are there different ways that you can arrange the important information on your screen so that it's most usable to your viewer? Also, if you're creating print instructions, you would be using graphics. Are there ways that are particularly different for the modality of video instructions to use supplementary graphics on the screen? So look in your book and see how you can compare print instructions to video instructions. Okay, so there's a few additional resources that I want you to take a look at. There's an online technical communication textbook that I like. It's by David McMurray, and I've included the link on the screen. And there's a website from Portland State University that has information on writing descriptions. So of course, writing descriptions is a large part of what you're going to be doing in writing the script for video instructions. You're going to be describing a process really carefully. Okay, so the next slide has to do with high quality documentation. So what do we mean by documentation? Surprisingly, this term is hard to understand for a lot of people. They think that documentation is just sort of an expanded descriptor for documents. However, documentation in technical and professional communication means the detailed guidelines that are written to accompany something that is a technical process. So if you are writing documentation for a software program or a software development process, for example, you would be recording every step of that process, and it would need to be recorded in such a way that somebody else could follow it and achieve the same result at the end. So if you're writing documentation for a process that you're displaying in a video instruction set, that means that that is the replicable series of events that somebody else needs to perform or follow in that precise way that you've recorded so that they can achieve the same result. So I have information on the slide that says, why is lacking this, meaning the lack of documentation, one of the biggest mistakes innovators and entrepreneurs can make? Well, the reason why that's a problem is if the steps in a process aren't documented, it's very difficult to replicate them in the same way in the future. So there are several types of documentation: instructions, which is what you're working on, specifications, and procedures and protocols. So I want you to think about these in light of the kinds of projects a community organization might want you to do. As you know, in a few weeks, you're going to be embarking on creating a kind of output. It can be a video, it could be a document for a community organization. Think about how community organizations or nonprofit organizations or even large companies, for-profit companies, use documentation just in the everyday process of performing the work that they do. So think about these 3 bullet pointed items on your screen as subcategories of the larger descriptive term documentation. Okay, so all instructions, all documentation have similar core features. Your video instructions will have these features too. Often you'll deliver this verbally in instruction set, but you'll probably have graphics on screen that will share some of these contents as well. So you'll have a title. You'll have, as I mentioned in class, you'll have an introduction, which will probably have a purpose statement, like why would somebody want to do this? You'll have a parts list or required tools. You'll have safety information. I know that we noticed in one of my students' videos where she was using scissors, she even took the step of explaining that the user needs to be careful using those. You'll have all of the steps that are constitutive of the process. You'll have graphics that show the process, and you'll have a conclusion. So think about this. How would a multimodal instruction set demand the revisitation of this scheme? Would it? Would you have to do any of these things different if you were doing it in print versus if you were doing it in a video instruction set? Purpose statements and prospective readers, users. So can you always tell who your readers and users will be? I've told you for your instruction set for our class, you're going to want to think about our class pretty much as being the user base for your instruction set. Once you figure out who your user base is, or if it's clearly known, can you design your language to express your instruction set's purpose to them clearly? And there's a list on page 28 that will probably help you to do that a little bit better. And I really stress that you're going to want to write out, at least in the drafting stage, what you plan on saying in your video, because it will help you make sure that your language is designed appropriately for that audience. You might think about how you know your readers and users, who they are, and whether there are other levels of readers who might come across these instructions in a different context and what their needs might be. Your book talks about primary, secondary, and tertiary readers and gatekeeper readers, and that's important information for you to possess. So how will your readers and users employ your instructions or documentation? So if something is a print instruction set, let's say you work in a restaurant, and you work at the sandwich making counter, there might be some instructions adjacent to your workspace on a wall or on a flat tabletop, and you would need to refer to those for certain health safety protocols or processes for making a certain sandwich. That's going to be different than a situation when a user is accessing instructions via YouTube on a video. So you need to think about how and where your users will employ your instructions or documentation, and that's called the context of use. So I mentioned in class that you need to do research for the instructions that you're going to create. In the work world, or in other classes in our technical communication certificate and minor program, we work with SMEs. Those are subject matter experts. And so if you're a technical writer working at Sandia, you're engaging with SMEs all the time, because you might not be the physics expert, but you might work with a physicist. And so the physicist would be the SME, and you would be helping that physicist write up something to do with their research in a way that was accessible for the audience. That's the role of the tech writer. Now, the second question seems perhaps somewhat unrelated, but how can you use your senses to help guide you when you're adding depth to your documentation? Think about your senses, your sense of smell, your sense of sight, your sense of touch, your sense of hearing. How are those things going to shape what you include either in a print instruction set or in a video instruction set? Now, another thing that's really important to do, and we're going to do this in a few weeks, but not specifically with the instruction sets you're creating on video, is to test them. So if you were to observe somebody performing the process that you're describing, you would be running a usability test. And that data that you collect from that observation would be really valuable as you revise that documentation in a further iteration to make it better and more usable. So organizing and drafting in your instruction set is obviously really important. You want to have a great title that is descriptive. You want to have an introduction that defines the subject, states your purpose, stresses the importance, and describes the required ability. If there are any parameters that need to be outlined regarding usability, you need to state the time required, and you need to motivate your user. You need to list your parts, tools, and conditions, and have ordered steps. And how should you number the steps? That takes some thinking. You want to make sure that each step is a manageable process. As you're drafting, know that you need to write in command voice. And so look that up in your book. Be sure that you're writing